He's been squirming around all day.
You know, it's the endurance thing, which makes me think like
It's what?
the endurance thing. How long? Just a thought.
How long do you think this night will be?
I don't know. I mean, but after a day of work, I certainly wouldn't want to be sitting in a chair. It's the long days.
Yeah. She's replacing Donna.
Donna's gonna run it.
I know. She lives Elphinstone. Elphinstone. I don't know what Donna's family connections are, but I think that there's some long-standing differences in that. Oops, this is on. Good afternoon and welcome. The first thing we do every evening is check the volume and see if the people on the far side of the opening and archway can hear us. I guess you can today. There's speakers just there and we have to adjust them, but it sounds like they can. So welcome. It's Wednesday, July 18th, 2018. It's 7:03 and we're calling to order our regular council meeting for today. We have an amended agenda that was circulated to add a piece of correspondence, actually. Could have gone under 12.1, but it's under 12.4, and it's an extra piece of correspondence with a request for support for a project. So we'll get to that when we do. Are there any other additions or deletions? Then I'd look for a motion to support the agenda as amended and circulated. Councillor Lutz, Councillor Seegers, and all those in favor. Any opposed? Thank you. Our very first item is a delegation, and a warm welcome to Mayor Cameron Reid, says resident, who will speak on the reconciliation movement, and he's joined by Randy Joe, which is good to see both of you. So when you're, and bring up another chair if you want, and when you're ready, just push that button in front. It'll turn red, I think.
Somebody's cut us off before we got started.
They do that to former politicians.
Okay. Mr.
Thank you very much and welcome.
Mr. Mayor, councillors and staff, thank you very much for having us this evening as a delegation. We really appreciate the support that you've shown us and the fact that you're willing to partner with us on this project. But since the launch, we've been fundraising. And although we've got your support, now we need dollars. So we're here this evening actually asking for the dollars. Now, we're not asking for the taxpayers of Sechelt to cough out money. We realize that you have money from the community forest that you put into reserves for some significant project in the future. We have received $30,000 from the community forest in their community, I think it's their agency building fund, where they're trying to build relationships with the native people and other governments on the coast where they are actually doing their business. So we're here this evening asking you to please consider opening up your wallet in the money that you receive from the community forest and offer us some financial support. We think this is a significant opportunity for the whole coast, not just Sechelt, but the whole coast, to benefit in building community through reconciliation. And we're asking that you consider opening that account up and recognizing this as a significant opportunity for a significant project on the coast where everybody will benefit. Randy?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Yes, this reconciliation movement is very important on this nation and this coastline of the Sechelt territory. We do need the dollars. We've been fundraising, things are going good, but you know, we're a long ways away from our total on what we're trying to achieve here. Reconciliation is very important to me and my nation. We've been struggling to do it for at least 150 years through the stories of my family. And it's time. It's spreading across Canada right now, and a lot of other communities, they're getting a lot of good support. And we need this more than ever now. You know, it's time. You know, it's time for change. It's time to bring down those walls. You know, through my whole lifetime, I've seen that wall around my reserve, and we're trying to tear that down. And we need your support. We need you with us. You know, this is the most important item I've ever got challenged with in my life. I've been in politics. My family's been in politics, you know, for the last 150 years. We've been leaders on this coast. We're the Mayo clan, the Joe family. We've been in politics a long time, and we've been struggling to do reconciliation. My great-grandfather, Basil Joe, my grandfather, Clarence Joe, all my grandmothers, you know, we've done this, and we had no success. With this council, I hope you open your hearts and your wallets and support us. Thank you.
Do you have any questions of us or our committee that's here this evening?
Yeah, thank you very much for that request, and certainly we'll find a way to process it. But there will be some comments by councillors. We'll start with Councillor Mueller.
Thanks, I got the button on first, speak first. So a lot of us went to the kickoff event, and I haven't heard necessarily a lot since then in terms of an update, but just want to let you know that I think right now the reconciliation movement that is going on is by far the most important thing that's happening in Sechelt and on the Sunshine Coast in terms of the overall vision of what's going on. It's fantastic. Grassroots, that's the only way it can happen. And so I think, you know, you have my full support, but I was wondering if you could give us a bit of an update as what's happened since then.
Okay, since then we've been doing a lot of planning. I think we're about ready to launch the first exercise with the weaving, Nancy, that will start when? In August. So we're hoping to do 4 blankets, one of which could be in this building. And so we've got, say, $30,000 from the community force, which is a very significant contribution. But our budget is, in fact, $191,000 if we're able to do a documentary of the actual whole program. So we're desperately short. We're starting without a lot of funding to carry us on, and we're hoping for support from yourselves and others in order that we not stall and be searching for money and then having to start the ball rolling. We feel we've got that momentum and a large part of the community on board, and more, I think, coming on board, wanting this to become a reality, not a failed attempt.
Yes, we have been meeting quite often here. We're coming up with some great ideas from both sides. The Chief and Council has been coming to our meetings, and you know, that's a positive because they're pretty busy, but they'll make time to come into our meetings and listen. You know, we have their full support through this idea. We got so many ideas. It's just incredible. Like, we had a meeting today, very good meeting. You know, we had Keith Julius, our counselor, attending the meeting, He spoke very eloquently. We still have the chief and council's full support, but you know, we need everybody together, and it's very important.
Other comments or questions? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Who else are you going to approach? Because, I mean, obviously we're one, but where else?
We've approached the SCRD, the SIGD, the Community Foundation, we're going to the Vancouver Foundation, we're going to banks, we're going to numerous entities for funding. But a lot of the funding cycles are at certain periods and we won't qualify, for example, until next January. We want to get going now. We don't want to stop and run out of that enthusiasm and momentum that we have.
Yes, and a lot of these companies and entities that we were looking at have a lot of restrictions. We are still coming up with new ideas for other companies on the coast. Lehigh, for example, the forest companies that are involved with the Seashell Nation on the coast here, mining companies, you know, right now we have a lot and we can open up to even more, but you know, we're getting organized, you know, better organized, and we're coming up with some great ideas.
One of the interesting dilemmas that we've identified through some research today is the fact that by a native, non-native group working together to try to resolve, we don't qualify for some of the granting that has to be, say, totally native. So we're working as a native white community trying to build it together, and we're finding we're running into some hurdles and stumbling blocks that shouldn't be there because we're working together and trying to make it work for the whole coast.
That's interesting. Councillor Lutz.
Where are you at your fundraising now? What have you reached?
We're about $37,000 now, and the budget is $191,000.
Any final comments? I have a couple I'll make, but Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, just a quick question. Sometimes when we're doing these community projects, groups such as yours will partner with another organization to become a charity, in effect. The donations that you get would then be tax-free. Is that something that has been entertained?
That's actually something we're doing through the District of Seashell.
No, we really appreciate the fact that you have partnered with us in that regard so that we got a grant from the Community Foundation because we're partnering with you. They couldn't give it to us because we're not a charitable organization. So through working with you, we were able to get that money.
And any individual donations that people have, we can issue receipts through the District of Seashell so they can have a personal deduction from their income tax, should they pay income tax and have enough money to donate both.
And of course, the next thing is the crowdfunder.
Yes.
Thanks.
That's a possibility, crowdfunding. And Councillor Seegers?
Yeah, I was wondering, how does an individual person who wants to donate, how do they do that? Do they have to come to the municipality? Can they come some other way to you?
They can come to us through our committee or through you if they want a tax receipt. We haven't been flooded by those people.
Yeah, those individuals can contact the Reconciliation Steering Committee, I guess you'd call it, or whatever. The checks could be made out to the Reconciliation Movement, care of the District of Seashell, but it's the District of Seashell that will issue the tax receipts. So let's make sure that's part of the media coverage. Anyone who would like to contribute to that. I'd like to say a couple of things. First of all, of course, you know, we support this. We agree very much with Randy's comments that this is essential and the time is now. Given that we do have our own budget cycles and processes and things to look at, so we won't be writing a check in the next 10 minutes. But we will consider that seriously. Second thing I wanted to note was that the major increase in the budget comes because of the interest in documenting the process over time. It's that documentation process. So I'm hoping that Heritage Canada, the National Film Board, and some of the ones that fund documentaries and video work are also being approached so that we can at least, and we'll always send letters of support for that, so that will work out. Finally, when you say your budget is about 190 and you've raised 37, and I know that 30 of that came from the community forest and about 5 came from the SCRD. So a whole lot of it is currently government support, which is good. And I know the Seashelf Nation Council has said that they can cover the actual totem, the cedars that will be used for the totem. So that's probably $30,000 right there. That's important. Having said all that, when you first came, we understood it was one of the objectives was to make it not a top-down government-funded project, but in fact a grassroots project where everybody could come through and maybe a $10, $20 donation and support while they were also getting through the reconciliation movement. So I hope that grassroots sense of participation doesn't disappear, because we want the reconciliation to be between people and not just between governments. So the other final thing I would say is that when I first heard the discussion and thought about how this would work and thought of Mayor Reid as being a perfect co-chair with Chief Feschuk for our community in terms of the reconciliation between a former staff sergeant and mayor and a leader in the settler community and an outstanding leader in the nations community. I'd forgotten just how persistent Cameron Reid would be and how much he would actually just be here and make sure we got it done, and he wouldn't let us forget about where all the money was and also, of course, he founded the community forest and knows exactly where the legacy fund is and how it's used, and he's always been one who said that the funds from the community forest belong to the community at large, but in particular the taxpayers of Seashelf. So yes, it is in our hands, we know that, and thank you for your work to get us in a place where we do have some decisions to make. But we will need a bit of time and consideration on this.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for hearing from us, and thank you for your ongoing support. And I would like to thank the staff very much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. From Gary Feschuk, he was sorry he couldn't make it. As you can understand, he's still going through his rehab, and he has a hard time getting around. So he asked me to sit in for him, and I was delighted to be here. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I suspect we'll have to bring that back to a FCED committee where we can talk about what the overall budget is and what our contribution might be. And no. There are no proclamations, which is item 4. So we move to item 5, which is the adoption of the minutes of the previous council meeting. And that's the minutes of the July 4th, 2018 meeting, pages 6 to 15. And first, a motion to receive. Thank you, Councillor Mueller and Councillor Lutz. And I ask that so I can always then ask if there's any errors or omissions now that we've received it. Anyone noticed any errors or omissions in the regular meeting minutes of July 4th? Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. Page 6. The last sentence in the first paragraph under the bollards. Keep the bollards on Bailey Road and Maxey Lane in place. I don't believe the bollards are on Maxey Lane. They're only on Bailey Road.
What's the name of the road on that little?
It's the intersection, yes, but Maxey Lane is the, just a
Is that the one on the
clarification.
strata title? The strata
No.
one? No, that's Maxey Lane is the one that goes
It's
to
the
the
road
right.
to the
if you're
site,
moving
yeah.
off. Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's not maybe as precise as it should be. Yeah. Yes, they actually wanted Maxey Lane. They used that as an expression of the fact that it was not a closed and dead-end road. So Maxey Lane remain open and keep the bollards on Bailey Road in place.
Okay, that's fine. No other errors. Thanks.
Any other errors that anyone else noted? Then a motion to adopt is received. Councillor Seegers, Councillor Wright. All those in favor? That's carried. And we can move on to, item 6, any business arising from those minutes. Any follow-up, Councillor Seegers?
It's just a process question with regards, on page 12, with regards to Resolution 7A-21. So we've endorsed the Studio 2545 Salon and Spa liquor license application. Just wondering, at what point does the letter of support get drafted and sent out? And then does that go to the applicant, or does that actually go to the Liquor Control Board?
To our planning department. Municipal planner?
Mayor and Council, after the adoption of tonight's minutes, we'll be preparing that letter to the Liquor Control Board and carbon copy to the applicant.
Thank you. Any other business arising? Moving on then through item 7 to item 8. We are at bylaws, and we're here to look at second and third readings of non-medical marijuana bylaw, which is item 8.1. First, a motion to receive the report from the planner. Thank you, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Shanks. All those in favor? That's carried, and we'll turn it to the municipal planner, Ms. Lettman.
Mayor and Council, you have before you the public hearing report, as well as the documentation around the public input that we received. There were approximately 17 people at the public information meeting. 14 of those responded, and in that, I'd like to point out that 64% were in favor of temporary use permits moving forward as a mechanism. 86% were in favor of continuing community consultation after the provincial and federal legislation comes into effect. And 79% were in general favor of the proposed bylaw to regulate the use of non-medical marijuana in terms of retail and cultivation and production. There were 17 people at the public hearing, and the comments, I'll summarize those in a moment, as well as there were 36 emails received from 28 members of the public. And to summarize the comments, there was some on odor control. A lot of these do not apply to the zoning bylaw. So, but I'll run through them regardless. Hours of operation, again, not really applicable to the zoning bylaw. Temporary use permits, they will allow existing retailers to remain open. There was compliance comments, again, outside of our realm of things in terms of the land use bylaw. The medical benefits of marijuana, that's not disputed, but it isn't applicable to the land use bylaw. The existing retailers need to stay open. We've recommended to council, and council has moved that motion, that we follow a path of temporary use permits. And I'd like to report today that we have received 4 from the existing 4 retailers that we know of in Sechelt have all applied for temporary use permits, and they'll be coming forward to the planning committee at the end of August. In terms of smoking, again, that's not applicable to the land use bylaw. There were complaints about the liquor distribution board and how that the province plans on doing distribution. Again, not part of the land use zoning bylaw. There was encouragement of edibles, which are not included in the federal or provincial legislation, are really outside of the zoning bylaw. Some of the comments were about how the zoning was too early. And so, in effect, though, we have done what many municipalities have done, and just moved forward. And since we started this process, the federal legislation as well as the provincial have been adopted, and they will be implemented in mid-October. And we're being contacted quite frequently by the provincial government on the mechanisms of how their retail licensing process will go. There was also comments around the health and safety risks of using marijuana. Again, not applicable to the land use bylaw. And there was a request to remove references to temporary use permits and consumption lounges in the bylaw. And those, they are not recognized, but we've been trying to do a preemptive that we're recognizing them. And then under the legal review, that was the second part that we had in the last couple of weeks, is that our legal review suggested that we should remove the prohibited uses section, because it has those limited prohibited uses and doesn't do the whole spectrum. And the idea is that when a zoning bylaw doesn't list a use, that it is prohibited. So that's the direction we've done. We're recommending removal of that section from the bylaw. And then I think that's it. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that report and the report on the public hearing. Any questions of the report from councillors to the municipal planner? Councillor Mueller.
I just wanted to commend the municipal planner for some fantastic work on the medical marijuana bylaw to date. I think it's a really complex file, and I was really comfortable with what came through. So just wanted to add that.
Okay. Thank you for those comments. And moving then to our recommendations. Recommendation 2, that the minutes of the public hearing be received. Councillors Seegers and Wright, and all those in favor? That's carried. That the zoning amendment be amended to remove the prohibited uses section, moved by Councillor Mueller and Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? And finally, that the zoning amendment be given second reading as amended and then third reading, moved by Councillor Wright and Councillor Mueller. All those in favor? That's carried. Which then takes us to the bylaw itself, which is item 8.1B, page 125 of the agenda package, and the amended portions. They already been deleted? Okay. So for second reading, the bylaw number 25288, 2018, non-medical marijuana, a bylaw to amend District of Sechelt zoning bylaw number 25, 1987, regarding non-medical marijuana cultivation, production, research, and retail sales. Who would like to move second reading? Councillor Mueller would. Councillor Lutz, second. Any discussion at second reading? Councillor Seegers.
And this is as amended?
As amended.
Thank you.
As before us and as amended. So as in the agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And third reading of bylaw number 25288, 2018 is moved by Councillor Wright and Councillor Seeger seconding. And any discussion at third reading? All those in favor? That's also carried unanimously. And that will come back for adoption after it's sent to the Inspector of Municipalities? Or does it have to go to the inspector? No, it just comes back to us in 2 weeks? Good. Yes, good work, and it is really complicated, both for the community, for the councillors, retailers, perhaps not for the planning department, but for the rest of us it was. And for the planning department. Okay. Before us for adoption, item 8.2 is the Comprehensive Development Zone for RTC Properties Limited, known as the Strand. And we have first a recommendation that we receive the report from the community planner. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Shanks. All those in favor? That's carried. And a brief report from the planning department. Director Corbett.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. The report in front of you is to give effect to the rezoning from R1 to CD 39. This is for the 20-lot townhouse development located at 5833 and 5845 Sunshine Coast Highway. It was given third reading on December 20th, 2017. As part of that, the applicant was required to fulfill a number of conditions and obligations. In the report, we indicate they have met everything they were required to do. That included the geotechnical assessment, the tree cutting permit, and the development permit. There were changes on some of them because the nature of the rezoning changed, taking some of those amenities out of the equation. And they are entering into development agreement with regard to securing the parkland dedication. So all the conditions of adoption for this proposed zoning bylaw have been met, and therefore we're recommending that council adopt the bylaw.
Thank you very much. So adoption of bylaw number 25274, 2016, CD 39 RTC Properties Limited, which is a bylaw to amend District of Sechelt zoning bylaw number 25, 1987 by rezoning 3 properties in the downtown Sechelt neighborhood from R1, a single-family residential zone, to a new comprehensive development zone 39, to permit a multifamily residential zone and a PA1 Parks, Recreation, and Assembly 1 zone. Adoption is moved by.
Actually, I had a question about the report.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I got ahead of that.
Let's hold that in abeyance and go back to the report and a comment on that.
So I went back and I reviewed the video of November 15th when we last dealt with this, and there was a lot of questions around Snicket Park dedication. And I know this is you're new to this file. So I was just curious, in this one here, it speaks of Snicket Park, more or less. I had assumed from that discussion that we had that we would have some type of a concrete plan around that in advance. And here we're hearing that that's going to happen after, or at the development permit stage. Is that when we're going to see it?
Yeah, it was done at DP. Yeah. So 2 aspects of that. The securing of the parkland is through that development agreement that secures the area. What it looked like in the area was part of the development permit that had been approved. So it's in the landscape plan that identifies that.
Okay, so we're still expected to see it at a later date. It's just the way that the wording was, that the cultural recreational facility would be satisfactory to council. And I believe Ms. Lettman was behind that line of questioning.
Mayor and council, I believe the development agreement is a no-build covenant until that is secured. So there will be a dedication happening. And then it also has the servicing agreement that needs to go forward in it as well. So I think there's a number of things in the development agreement, and it's a no-build. So there will be no construction on the site until that is dedicated.
Dedicated to the satisfaction of council, which is what the actual wording was on this.
It's identified in the zoning bylaw. That area that's designated as parkland is the area that's going to be dedicated.
There were improvements to the area. Is that what you're thinking of?
That's what I was thinking of, yeah, was the actual type, I guess, to use the words, that is satisfactory to council. And I'm okay if it happens at the development permit. I just wanted to be clear because Snicket Park is such an important part of this.
It was originally part of the community amenity package, and when that got removed, we still had the dedication to meet that requirement, and that was explained at that meeting, but there were the improvements to the land is not included.
Okay. I remember that as well. It was the District of Sechelt will be, so any improvements will be totally under the control of the District of Sechelt and at our expense. So that's clarify from the report for today. And I've read into the record the title of the bylaw and looking for somebody to move adoption. Councillor Mueller, Councillor Lutz, all those in favor? That's any opposed? Opposed?
Yes. I'd like that recorded. I'm not in favor of the way it went.
Just
Thanks.
let me count again. All those in favor of the adoption? Okay, any opposed to adoption? Okay, that's carried. And there was a request that the opposition to the adoption of the bylaw be recorded. If we take away the 6 months for the servicing agreement to be negotiated, this proceeded fairly well considering how complex it was with the public hearing. And so I'm glad to see that it's started and completed within a basically 2-year time frame for a complex file. And moving on to 8.3, the Grove Art Gallery. First, a motion to receive the report in support of the Commercial Art Gallery. Thank you, Councillor Lutz and Councillor Wright. All those in favor? And I would look then to the municipal planner to speak to this issue.
Staff are recommending adoption of the bylaw for the Grove Art Gallery. There has been virtually no public input on that, and the proposed zoning amendment will define and add a commercial art gallery as a new permitted use within the CD30 zone that's applicable to the Watermark development. The amendment is consistent with the objectives of the official community plan and numerous other plans. And the gallery proposal will contribute to the vibrancy of the downtown area and provide a venue for Sechelt arts and cultures community. And the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure has approved the bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of that report? And like the one previously, this has gone through first reading, second reading for discussion, third reading for discussion, and is before us today bylaw number 25294, 2018 Grove Art Gallery, a bylaw to amend District of Sechelt zoning bylaw number 25, 1987 by defining and including the use of commercial art gallery as a permitted use in the Comprehensive Development Zone 30, CD30, Pacific Spirit Properties, Torito Development. And adoption is moved by Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz. All those in favor of adoption? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you for taking us through those. New business, there is no new business, but we move to item 10, business items. And the first is a report from our Financial and Corporate Services Department, a report from the Manager of Financial Services on a BC Rural Dividend application. Moved receipt by Councillor Lutz and seconded by Councillor Seegers. All those in favor of receipt? That's carried, and I'll look to the Director of Corporate Services to speak to this.
Thank you, Your Worship. So yeah, this report is to seek Council's endorsement to submit an application to the BC Rural Dividend Program. This would be to get funding to complete the Sechelt section of the Suncoaster Trail that would go from the Roberts Creek at the border, Roberts Creek, up to the airport. It's a $250,000 project that's currently in our 2019 budget, so this would help reduce the cost contribution from the district and the DCCs, which are shared 50-50. The project right now is to design and build the remaining portion of the trail between the airport and Roberts Creek, add signage and map kiosks to the existing route through the districts of Sechelt. So we're seeking approval to seek a $100,000 grant through the BC Rural Dividend Fund.
Thank you, and I'll look to Council to see if there's any questions of the Director on this report and on the initiative. Councillor Mueller.
So I'm happy to see this before us. Obviously, the Suncoaster Trail has been on our program for some time. The routing, we're going to deal with that. Is that going to come before Council?
Yeah, so it's part of the Parks Master Plan, so it would be coming to Council as far as the actual route. But this is from the airport to the Roberts Creek, not necessarily dealing with the portion through the village.
Thanks.
And I think most of the routing is sketched out in draft form in terms of how it comes along the waterfront when it hits our municipal boundaries and comes down Selma Park Road. Any other questions of the report while we're here? Well, certainly, any idea what the timelines are for this application and receipt? And I'm thinking of the 2019 budget and whether we would know as we're finalizing that budget.
That would be the goal. I believe it's by the July 31st, the application has to be in. I actually don't know when they would intend to announce it, but one would hope it would be in the fall, so we would know for 2019.
Okay. And is it the kind of granting program that would benefit from council lobby efforts on the ministries and parks? Or is it much more arm's length than that? Do you know?
They claim it's more arm's length than that, but
okay.
As far as I understand.
Just need to know in advance of UBCM, for example, or any other opportunities when we may be interacting with well-placed civil servants or ministers. So I'd look then for council to pass the second recommendation or to move the second recommendation, which is that council directs staff to submit this application. Thank you, Councillor Seegers, Councillor Mueller. Any discussion of this? All those in favor? And that's carried. Wish ourselves good luck. And then I'm sure we have the other 50% well in hand. Maybe. And the Parks Master Plan that outlines this and other projects is going to come to an August Committee of the Whole meeting? Aiming for that. Okay, thank you. Item 10.2, development permit on 4648 Whitaker Road. And we have a report from the Director of Planning and Development Services. I would ask for somebody to move receipt of the report. Thank you, Councillor Lutz. Councillor Seegers seconding. All those in favor? And I would turn to the Director of Planning and Development to speak a little bit to this report. Thank you.
I need a PowerPoint up. Thank you. I've got it. I just need it loaded. Thank you.
There we are.
Thanks. So the application in front of you, sorry, your worship, members of council. The application in front of you is for a development permit for a guest cottage located in Davis Bay on 4648 Whitaker Road. This is going to be a little bit different presentation in that I'm asking you for direction on a number of things because what I have put forward is a refusal on the DP based on the interpretations in the application of DPA 8. And there has been a number of inconsistencies around how this gets applied, how we define certain things. So part of it is getting input. Sorry, that's not, I don't think it's working.
You're having as much trouble as our guests
I
do.
know.
It's just
Sorry.
the way.
Am I? Yeah. Never mind.
Thank you for all that
Thank you.
support. And here we are. Yeah.
So this area is under an R1 residential zoning, and in our zoning bylaw, and I will say I made correction onto the report, the size is incorrect on my PowerPoint. It's actually 2,002 square meters on this lot. So it, under the zoning, under R1, it allows a guest cottage on lots of this size, and the maximum size being 55 square meters, so that's just under 600 square feet.
Could you tell me what the correction was on that slide?
I had on the 0.70 hectares, 7,000 square meters, it's 2,000
Square meters.
square meters.
The lot size.
So their lot size is 2,002 square meters, so it applies under this
Okay.
regulation. I was reading something else off the map.
Okay.
So under this, so the application came in for this, and it came to my attention because there were some neighborhood concerns raised about it and how we were interpreting it. In looking at it, it raised a lot of concerns about how we are actually defining it, and I have that detailed in the report, in that the guest cottage is allowed to go to 2-story based on how we define floor area. So the floor area definition excludes ancillary or auxiliary parking, and so that has been interpreted to mean that the parking structure underneath it is allowed without affecting the maximum lot size. The other that got more complicated in here is around what standards apply in terms of setback and height. We have regulations around accessory buildings and structures, but it has a clause in there that says no accessory building can be a dwelling unit, which means it doesn't really apply. So the question is, do we use single detached, which would be fine on setbacks, but the height is 10.5. So there's kind of been a little bit of a picking and choosing and a lot of deeming to be something else. And so it's created some uncertainty there. We also have a development permit area number 8, which states that these kind of developments are regulated through that. And there hasn't been a history of doing that. So one of the questions I would like council to give consideration to, that can be a fairly onerous DPA when we are applying it to our subdivisions because it has a minimum lot size in there. So if we're not applying it to something that's very clearly infill, we could probably streamline that for our applicants. So I'll go through some of the definitions and some of the concerns, but those are the kind of things that I'm looking for input on. One is the specific DP, but of greater concern is how do we move forward? What kind of standards should be applied? We can do an interpretation memo, we can catch up with the new zoning bylaw, but it's getting some clarity on what was the intent behind that notion of the guest cottage. And then the other complicating factor that in Sechelt bylaw, there is no restriction on accessory buildings or structures in the front yard. And that's rather unusual for most municipalities, because if these things are in the rear yard, it's not raising a lot of issues. It's not as concerning. It's that we have a fairly open-endedness around what shows up in a front yard. So this is the guest cottage proposal. It, in terms of the footprint and the area that is in the dwelling unit area is within that 55 square meters. The footprint on the elevation map will show up a little bit bigger. I think it's 62 square meters on the footprint of the garage. But in terms of what the livable area is on the top side, it does meet that regulation in coming within the 55 meters, because the area of the porch area is netted out. So this area is in the front yard of just off Whitaker. It's a sloped lot. It slopes up. The main house is at the top of the slope. This is closer to the front area. It meets all the side yard regulations that we have applied on it, and it's beyond 5 meters back from the front, so it would meet the single detached aspect to that. This is a little hard to see in PowerPoint, but you get a notion of the bottom part. That is Whitaker Road, and then it is in that corner adjacent to the north side, and the house at the very rear of the lot. So here's the concerns in looking for a request for clarification of kind of what constitutes a guest cottage. Can it also include, if we are allowing garage, which essentially means carriage house, can it include that, and can it include laneway housing? Because under our current zoning bylaw, we don't actually have a provision for that. We do in the OCP, and we do in the development permit area. So it creates some confusion with applicants as to what they can and cannot do, because it implies that we are allowing this, but we don't actually define that kind of use. And then getting clarity on what rules apply to height and to setbacks. If we apply single detached to the setbacks, that would be not too bad, but the only setback applied to accessory is 1 meter on all sides, which would mean it'd be very close to the road if you were doing front yard. The other question is, does it constitute a minor DP? This was dealt with initially. It was a permitted use. The only thing that was being applied to it was that steep slope. They met the requirement to have the geotech done. It met those requirements. And that is one that is delegated authority to me if that's all that is required. Where it got more complicated on delegated authority and what it is this is bigger, and if it applies to DPA 8, I don't have delegated authority. So that means it comes through a committee structure. Is the front yard location okay? Is that something that we want to move forward on? Should it be okay in all instances? Should there be other guidelines about where certain topographical issues may suggest that's fine? There's lots of areas that would be under this zoning, say in Sandy Hook, where it's sloping down. It's quite common to see a full garage in the front yard. It's barely visible from the street. So there's certainly a lot of areas in Sechelt where the topographical aspects would suggest we probably need to be a little more site-specific. Some work, and some it would be much more impactful. The question of does the DPA number 8, that is for intensive residential, does it apply to these kind of homes? And a rather timely one, are short-term rentals okay if we're moving into this kind of structure? Should there be any guidance on there saying yes or no on that? In terms of how guest cottage and granny suite, that sort of thing, is usually defined in other municipalities, and how BC Housing and CMHC define infill housing, these are the kind of things that apply. Guest cottage, granny suite, and garden suites are usually a one-story, or they're a one-story and a loft. So they're usually fairly small scale, often in the rear yard, not always, but in most cases, unless it's a waterfront home, in which case your front is usually closer toward the water. This is what a carriage and coach house looks like. The one on the very bottom, they're very traditional kind of coach house. This is quite common in the east of those that truly were coaches. It has now been adopted in a number of communities. It always implies garage below, unit above. They can vary in size. That red one is from Vermont. Those are 1-acre lots that accommodate that, and that is at the rear of that property, but being on a corner. Laneway houses don't always have garages below. In a lot of municipalities, they try and put them into areas where you've got very high levels of transit. So some examples may not have garage, some may. The example in the larger one, these are very common in a number of cities. Inner city of Calgary certainly went down this route. Whoops, sorry. So questions on how to regulate. Should we be developing new standards to provide some guidance? Was this the intention of guest cottage, in which case we can keep it at a DP, and that's all the regulation we need, in which case this application can be approved? Does DPA 8 apply, in which case it would be questionable whether it met those guidelines? So the options for 4648 Whitaker is either to approve subject to conditions set by council, to defer consideration if additional information is required, to refer to committee if there are any changes directed by council, or to refuse. And then wanting direction on options for new applications. Do we need to set new standards? Do we need to clarify the process? What's minor? What's major? What needs to come to you? What can I sign off on? Are there exceptions? Do we need a bylaw amendment? In interim, can we do interpretation memo? So that concludes my report.
Thank you very much for that report, and I'll open it to council in a moment. But when we agreed that this would come, there was some discussion about whether this would come straight to council or not. And at the time, the Director of Planning and myself agreed that it was straightforward enough that it would come directly to planning or to council and not go through committee. And when I read her report, I had the same impression. After listening to the report and the PowerPoint, I'm not so sure that it's actually something that should have come straight to council because it requires, however, if I can ask one question, you obviously, from writing the report and the recommendation, thought you had enough information to write the report, and you had enough information to come to a recommendation. Okay. Councillors, any initial thoughts? And I see Councillor Mueller's light on first.
So yeah, just as a general comment, something like this that deals with, kind of these complex policy issues, there's a number of points I would like to see a planning committee. But dealing with this one, I have two questions. So, as I understand your presentation, there appears to be two issues with this particular instance, which is the height and the parking inside.
Through the chair, to clarify, it's, their height actually isn't problematic. It's what is it? Does it actually meet the requirement of the intention of what a guest cottage is? So a question around the height related to the parking, or not so much the parking standard, but the form of the unit. So should two-story and front yard be okay? Does that meet the intent of what was intended in a guest cottage? So it's somewhat the height, although they're fairly close to what would be allowed under an accessory unit standard, but it's more of what was the intention when it came into the bylaw, when it was defined as guest cottage? Was that the intention to do carriage house, or was the intention to do something that it's 55 square meters total, and it's a one-story in rear yard? So it was really trying to get a sense of, does this meet the intent of when it came into the bylaw initially? Because it seems to be something else. And if that is the intent, then we can be much more upfront with our applicants about what's okay and what's permitted, because we are de facto permitting carriage homes.
Right, and I guess my question, so you're raising it as a classification issue then for council?
Correct.
But my question was, were the design to be altered in small ways, would it not have ended up here? And that's my question about the parking or the height. What was the breaking point in the decision of staff to bring this to council, particularly in terms of design?
In my mind, it was the location. If this was in a rear yard with those kind of standards and those kind of setbacks, I don't think there'd be any issue at all. Instead, it's in a front yard. And what we usually regulate through both zoning and in development permit guidelines is really the sense of the streetscape. The other issue, and where I think we need more clarity, is not only for an applicant, but for a member of the public. If this was to show up in your neighbor's front yard, is that our intention? In which case, I'm not sure anyone reading our bylaw would know that that's an acceptable use in an R1 zone.
Yeah. And just to follow up on the trigger point on this, the guest cottage would be 55 square meters at a single level.
Correct.
This is actually 55 on one level, which could be used for parking, but we don't covenant uses. So
Correct.
It could be used for anything by a future owner or in a year, and 55 meters above. So it's actually 110, it's twice the size of what the 2005 bylaw on guest cottages was. But because that's parking, it's nebulous about whether it is actually twice the size or just something else. But we can't covenant you don't have to park your car in your parking garage. That's the real issue.
And if I may, just to state why it didn't go to committee, it was mainly because the applicant had this application in and didn't want to delay it longer than we needed to. So I asked the indulgence to get it to council sooner. Normally, something like this, absolutely, it would go through APC and PCDC.
And I'm sorry that Councillor Inkster isn't here, but Councillor Shanks is, and some may and I did speak to the mayor, actually, who was the mayor at the time when this went through, just before the meeting tonight, to remind some of our discussions. I wasn't on the council at the time when this was adopted, but it was just at the end of the first term and the beginning of the second term of Mayor Reid. However, I see Councillor Lutz, and then I'm sure there are others.
Thank you. I would be more comfortable refusing this particular application to give us the time to have the discussions. And I think it's fairly clear that the implications could have quite an effect on the community, both good and bad. I would like to think that with the proper input from the community and the council, that we could devise some wording around how this could be done in a way that it could enhance our rentals if we put in things like no short-term, so that then it would be long-term rental or a true guest cottage. I think that these are things we really need to talk about, and to push this application through without having those discussions, I think is just too quick for me.
Okay, so that's a suggestion to refer it back to committee. Councillor Seegers, and then I'll look to Councillor Shanks.
Thank you. I see kind of two issues here. One is lack of clarity that staff have with the way the zoning bylaw and the OCP currently are written. They don't have the guidance that they need. And then the second is this particular application. So inside of your presentation, you indicated that if this was a single-family house being put on this lot, it would have certain setbacks, and those setbacks are actually being met by this property. It's not, or this proposal. It's not at the front of the lot and right on the lot line. It's actually 5 meters back, so it's 15 feet from the street, and it's actually set into the hill. In the documentation and some of the other documentation we've gotten, it's indicated that sight lines of neighbors will not be impacted because they've set it into the hill. So I think inside of the guidance that we need to look at is we need to also look at the impact on the streetscape and the neighbors of any particular development. So there has to be a way to give you guidance about what you can approve without bringing it to council and or the community, but then also where is the breaking point where it then needs to go to the community for input, because these buildings can have huge impacts all over our community. This is a half-acre lot, so we have lots of half-acre lots through Davis Bay, through West Sechelt, up East Porpoise Bay, like they're everywhere. So if we were to just say that a 2-story carriage house could be built in a front yard in any of the half-acre lots, we'd have them popping up everywhere, potentially. And I think you indicated you have a number of other applications that have already come in this week. So if we were to deal with this particular application, can we do this separately and still go ahead and look at all of these pieces that need to be, we need input from the community on in order to give you guidance going forward? Or if we pass this now, does that set a precedent that you have to follow for everything else?
Director Corbett. There's a couple of questions in there, but
There are. Thank you, through the chair. That would be the challenge is if this meets those requirements, and it's clear from council's perspective that that's what was intended in guest cottage. It does make it challenging if 2 doors down they want to do the same thing. On what basis would I refuse that? So that's the challenge, is just knowing of, does this constitute a guest cottage? Was that the intention under that zone? Is this appropriate, and getting a little more clarity on, this one met the setbacks of what a house would. But if we're applying accessory dwelling, if someone came in with 1 meter from it, is that okay, not okay, under our bylaw? So it's just, you can do it in a number of ways. Yes, it would, there's always setting precedents to the degree that it would make it challenging to accept one and not the neighbor or one street over and say, no. So it's just needing a little more, what would I mean, everything can be site-specific, there's always context, it's not like we say yes to one thing and it's across the board. But it would be useful just to get a little more on what makes this okay and others not.
Yeah, just to follow up from Councillor
Follow up to
Segers.
that. So if we were to, I mean, I know the proponents are sitting in the gallery here, and I know they're looking to move forward quickly. And I hope they appreciate the dilemma that we're dealing with here and the impact on the community. If we were to just delay this at this point, how long before we could come back? Because we're going to need to have some way to make exceptions given topographies, et cetera, throughout the community. As you've indicated, we've got steep slopes, we've got all kinds of things. So it's still not going to be straightforward in the end, but you need to know which ones you can just say yes to and which ones need to come back and go to the community. How long would it take for that information to be able to be gathered to come back so that we could consider this under those kinds of guidelines?
Director Corbett.
Through the chair, it may be useful of getting it in front of the next PCDC, which is next week. We could do that. What I can do, because it would be challenging, because we're putting the agenda out tomorrow morning, it would be a little challenging to write it tonight. I can if needed. Certainly present. I know. I actually do have some ready to go. I could do that. So we can get it in front.
Don't tell us, just impress us when you do it.
Yeah. Or I can do it through the presentation. So I can have this report on the agenda for it, and through the presentation go through what some options are, and then up to committee of how do you want to proceed, what would make sense for suggesting back to council, and then getting it into that next council meeting. Where it might just get a little more challenging on timing is I don't believe there's a council meeting in the second part of August, so it would be the September meeting it would come back to.
Okay, thank you for that. And while continuing discussion, we'll probably come back to that and look for a motion. But I'd like some discussion if people are ready. And was Councillor Shanks, I think, ready? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's hard not to agree with basically all the comments that have been made by previous councillors. I had a couple of questions. One, with the new zoning bylaw talking about carriage houses and laneway houses, would that address this situation?
Through the chair, it would, but the proposal we're making is not to have any accessory buildings or structures in the front yard unless there are very specific exemptions. So this wouldn't have been contemplated under that kind of thing. The size may have been, if we were allowing coach house, the size, the structure, yes, that would be it in terms of basic height and setbacks. Yes, it would. It's just that we would have them restricted to rear yard unless, and we'd have a clause in there around topographical, but it's where the slope goes the other direction, so that what you see from the street is reduced. That was the intention.
Yeah. My second question is, I think that I have seen a similar situation on 2 waterfront lots in East Porpoise Bay, with a garage and living quarters above. I need to check that out. And you might be familiar with the properties I'm talking about. It's just before the S-band.
Through the chair, there are approximately 7 that meet this kind of structure that are anywhere from decades old to a little bit more recent. But a number of them, approximately 4 of them, fell under that kind of interpretation, that the guest cottage and the parking didn't count. So yes, there are. This is not the first one. They do exist.
Okay. So I would at least like to defer it to the planning committee meeting.
That sounds like the second recommendation for that. Councillor Wright? I don't know. Was that a motion to defer it to the?
Yes.
Seconded? Seconded, which basically means Councillor Wright will have to hold his comments until after the vote, if that's okay. So we don't debate a motion to refer, but it is a motion to refer it to the very next planning committee meeting, which is 1 week away. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Yeah, that's carried. Apologies to the applicant because it will take at least another week and some discussion. I think that's in the best interests of the applicant and the community. I know some of us wouldn't have been prepared to support it tonight. So it might be a better chance after it goes to committee and there's full discussion and people recognize what the situation is. So it's been deferred till next Wednesday, 1 o'clock. And there are a number for people who are interested along Highway 101. There is one on Laurel Road that was built about 10 years ago, and it just depends on where you think the front of your house is. If you're on Highway 101 on the west side, you generally think the water side is the front of your house, so building a carriage house right on the road side, which is the highway, makes perfect sense. And if you're on Laurel Road on the same west side, there's one about a block south of Councillor Wright's house, which has a similar situation. Again, they're facing the water, so it's hard to say where the front is. We have 2 letters, one very long and one shorter from the applicants, so we know the situation as they understand it. We have notes. I have notes from neighbors on both sides, and so I know that there is some interest in the neighborhood and how we think this went through, and I think it does deserve some thinking. I was also hoping we could talk about the 2005 intentions because I think they were quite clear at the time, but there was also discussions at the time about differences on lots that were serviced by sewers and the sewer servicing, and those which in fact require septic. So this does indicate a new septic field being put in, but of course it's 30 feet above this premise, and it would serve the main house in the back. So we'd have to think, or Vancouver Coastal Health will have to think those kind of things through on our behalf. And there's actually quite a bit to think about in terms of where these go and how they will have an impact on the community. Councillor Wright.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. And then you have my house where the planning department can't figure out which is the front because my driveway comes in off of Laurel, but it's not the front. My house doesn't face Laurel. It faces 90 degrees from Laurel. And so they have real difficulty determining what all of the setbacks are. I had great fun with them when I was building, but it was,
were you bending the bylaw to set your house where?
No, I did not bend the bylaws. I wasn't on council at the time and I didn't bend the bylaws.
Interesting. So your 5-yard setback is to the south. That's right. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting. Councillor Wright, further comments? No? If there are no further comments from councillors, we'll look forward to this discussion continuing on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. And I imagine there'll be full attendance at that committee meeting. Moving on to item 11, reports from councillors. And if I could start on my right-hand side and look to Councillor Shanks if there's anything to report on your council activities.
No, there isn't, Your Worship. I've just had some concerns raised in a mobile home park where I live in Wilson Creek about the transfer of garbage and recycling, that particular issue we've talked about before. And there's still concern ahead of time in terms of what the impact will be on some of those people with respect to the next year's taxes. And so it would be nice to set a date where we can have that discussion, I think, in terms of some ideas on how we might be able to deal with that. That's all.
Was that coming to the next Finance Committee meeting? I'm sorry it wasn't resolved by July 4th on the last day of taxes,
Exactly,
because
and people appreciate that,
but I think it is coming forward. Director?
Yes, Your Worship, the plan is to have a report with council consideration for the committee on the August 8th.
And if we come to the right conclusions and need to make it retroactive for specific hardship cases, that's something I would raise at that committee meeting. Okay, and Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. I attended one of the World Cafes around the community forest engagement, and there was a good large group of people at the Monday night meeting. Heard a lot of different views. That was good, the whole idea of it. I also attended just yesterday some meetings with Community Association and Council, and that too was very helpful. And that's pretty well been my time.
Thank you for that report. And Councillor Mueller.
Thank you. Yeah, it has been kind of busy for different other types of meetings beyond what council normally serves up. But I think many councillors went to the World Cafe around the community forest. I went in the evening. I was much impressed by the turnout. There was over 70 people there and lots of different views represented. I did see, and what I was watching for was a little more of the middle ground showing up from the community at large, as opposed to the activists and those actually involved in the forest industry. That's often what are at those meetings, but I thought they had a really good tone, and I think our communications manager had a lot to do with that. It was well put together. We had a meeting, I believe that was last night, with the neighborhood associations, which was very good. Many of us on council missed that due to calendar error, but of course it's very important for us to meet with our neighborhood associations. A great meeting. I went to an Oktoberfest planning meeting, so I will be back again this year to kind of help the SDBA host that. It's been a lot of fun in the past, and I'm excited about doing it again. I also took the time to sit down and have a cup of coffee with the mayor and discuss, perhaps what some of my plans might be in terms of the next 4 years. I haven't announced anything to anyone yet, and I'm actually going away on vacation next week to take the time to really kind of decide what I plan on doing in the next 4 years, and I'll be sure to make an announcement after that. Thanks.
Thank you. If I can just editorialize on not the last comment, but on the World Cafe and the fact that, initially the middle ground didn't show up, but I think it's fair to say that everything I've heard of those two events and the beginning of that engagement is that the community is in fact building the middle ground. The proponents and all sides, in fact, they're actually building, they're coming together and they're looking at that middle ground. So, Councillor Seegers, report from council.
Thank you. I attended briefly the Catch a Trout Day, Chapman Creek Catchery. It was quite interesting seeing the little kids there trying to get their trouts. We had a Canada Day review meeting, and I think it's fair to say that while we still didn't have quite enough volunteers, those who came out and assisted on that day put in a huge effort, and it came together really well. I'd like to really acknowledge the District of Sechelt staff who came forward and provided an immense amount of support on that day, before, after. It really came together well. We know what we need to do for next year, and one thing that came up today was, and I passed that already on to Matt, was about the horses and having an issue with the crosswalks, right? So little things like that. So we'll follow up and fine tune it for next year. I have to acknowledge Kim Mann, who stepped forward and took on the contract with the district for Hackett Park. Amazing how she brought that together, and usually we see on Canada Day by about 2 p.m, pretty much dead at Hackett Park. Everybody's gone home. Here at the end of the day, 4 o'clock, there were still people around not wanting to leave. So it was a great day, and I want to just kudos to everybody who's involved with that. I attended the Self-Employed Women's Network meetup. It's been revitalized again in Sechelt. We have people coming from Half Moon Bay, from Davis Bay, or from Roberts Creek. We had a couple from Gibson's. So it's good to see that group coming together again and supporting each other. And then I also attended the Neighborhood Association Leaders Meeting last evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that report. And Councillor Wright, anything to report?
Thank you, Your Worship. Normally what I would do at this particular time is I would tell you about all the meetings that I have been at, and I'm going to do something a little bit different tonight for you. Those of you who know me are probably anticipating already. I know that the tickets for this evening's event are highly sought after, and so this could be considered a little bit of added value. It's an ode to a 4-year term. 4 years have come and passed, and now the question that I have to ask, what have I done that will really last? As on this question I think and ponder, I see Kinnickinnick ballpark lights over yonder. A highway crossing at Mission Park comes to mind, and the money to balance the operational budget was a great find. At Big Maples, 30 affordable homes will soon be found, while West Seashelt Sewer will soon be underground. The Purville Taylor Review has been done at City Hall, and good governance is all around us this fall. Vanta Pacific Hotel will now forward move, while the new development cost charge bylaw has found its financial groove. Public engagement was everywhere to be found, and live-streamed council meetings are all over town. As I consider what this council has passed, several questions come to my mind at last. Was it really my best? Will you do it again? The answer is simple but plain. The answer to each is a resounding yes. I assure you that at council, I will do my best. Thank you.
I'm not sure how we can follow that, so we'll just take a moment's silence and recess. I've often wondered when people announce their candidacy or confirm why people say congratulations. But after that performance, I'll have to say congratulations. Great performance. Thank you for that. I will begin the SCRD board report as one of the 2 representatives at the board, and the SCRD proceeds as it usually does. I suspect the highlight of the last week's work was the reconsideration of the grant application for the Chapman Creek project, which is the doubling down of the drawdown. It's the grant application which will support the potential for piping and using the Chapman Creek for stage 4 drought if we should get there. And the board as a whole considers that it's important that grants that are available should be applied for. So that was one of the big events of last week. And there's also some more infrastructure work coming to us tomorrow. By the end of the board meeting, I think we should have another announcement on the comprehensive regional water plan and accelerating that in some positive ways. Can't think of anything else right offhand. Does the SCRD board director have anything else you might think of? Director Wright?
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Wright.
You're waiting, aren't you? There was just the board meeting at which you've outlined what happened and the reports. And then there was just the one planning and development committee meeting. And there was a number of development variances, and search and rescue lease was given to the administration to negotiate and sign. And then there was just a quarterly status report of what's happened with the Planning and Development Department. And that concludes it.
Yes, and as I recall that planning committee meeting, it was about 80% through before the 2 municipalities got a chance to participate. It was all rural planning issues, yes. Moving on to item 12, items for information. We start with council correspondence. We have 4 items of correspondence that are before us on item 12.1. Motion to receive. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? And any of those, that's carried. Any of those items people would like to draw our attention to? I would just mention that for the 3 years we've been here, we've been getting a lot of material from Mrs. Peters, Kathy Peters, on child sex trafficking in BC, and she's become a very strong but reasoned advocate for more intensive work in British Columbia. And the fact that there's far more child trafficking in BC than we actually may recognize in our comfortable day-to-day lives. Our executive assistant has been in contact with her, and I think we'll try and bring some motions of support forward. And she's done a lot of work over the last 3 years to keep municipalities around BC informed of what's actually going on in their municipalities. And it's not just a big city problem, it's an international problem with, unfortunately, inroads into the Sunshine Coast as well. So we'll probably try and support those initiatives and urge the UBCM to push the province to protect our children in stronger ways. If there's no other comments on the council correspondence, then 12.2, the RCMP monthly stats, a motion to receive. Councillor Seegers moving and Councillor Mueller second. All those in favor? Any comments on those statistics? And the Sechelt visitor statistics, motion to receive. Thank you, Councillor Mueller and Lutz. All those in favor? That's carried.
I had a question about that.
Yes, Councillor Mueller.
So, as some of us may know, there are some changes potentially coming on with the Sechelt visitor, and I just wanted to ask staff if that's been assigned to anyone, potentially to change the contract, or I believe that's going to be lying fallow come the middle of the year. So,
Has Community Services contacted the district in any official way? Would be the question.
We've had some minor discussions, but nothing officially has moved yet. But we are aware of it and are on it.
okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions of either of those items? And that moves us to item 12.4, which is a letter of correspondence that came in from innovationisland.ca, and it's one which is asking for a letter of support for a what's the direct? I'm looking for the direct ask. Letter of support for an application they're making to develop a new program for community partners on the coast. And as some may recall, Innovation Island is Nanaimo-based, Vancouver Island-based, but does programs and services across the coast, and Vancouver Island has done a couple of initiatives here, 3 or 4 in Sechelt and the Sunshine Coast, and was first brought to our attention by Councillor Seegers, I think in 2016 at the beginning, with support. So they're directly asking for support, and council, our staff wanted us to see that because the deadline is July 24th, so we'd have to look at this tonight. So have somebody comment or move that we, in fact, write the letter of support they're asking for. Councillor Seegers to comment?
Comment first?
Yeah.
I actually had a conversation with Graham when he was over here the last time, and he's really looking to tailor this program to be something that is very applicable to our residents here. We actually, through his work with them, we actually have some, I think he said there were about 4 businesses that have really started moving forward and have gained a lot of traction and have grown through the minimal input that we've provided initially. With this, I believe he's looking at obtaining funding from ICE-T. Mm-hmm. And so this letter would actually indicate that if he goes forward and does this, he would be able to come here and, with our support, minimal, as he's indicating in here, a venue, he's used the Seaside Center in the past. Our marketing people have helped them with some marketing, perhaps lunch or not. And that's all our involvement would be. And he would come and work with people up and down the coast. So I'm very much in favor of this. I'd move that we provide a letter of support.
Right, and what he's looking for is on page 200 of our agenda, 3rd paragraph of his 2nd page. consider providing us with a non-binding letter of support that we can use to secure project funding. And seconded. And thank you. And then further discussion, Councillor Mueller?
Yeah, it's a little bit tough because, you know, now we have Scredo that's supposed to be handling most of this stuff. We did approve previously a contract to do some work with Innovation Island. That was when we, in the lapse in between SIL and Scredo. And in my thoughts, this would always basically be something that was either requested by Scredo for something that they needed. The tough part, and I remember back to when we did do that work of approving their contract, is they didn't provide any specific details about what they were going to do. And in this one, again, we're short of details. And so I won't be supporting it because it's just, I just don't know enough about what they actually are doing.
Okay, I think they have provided reports on their programs here, but in this case, this is also being sent to Scredo, and Scredo is considering it in terms of actual funding. Our letter would simply be, would not be any related to funding. It's a non-binding letter of support that we think this is a good kind of project to go forward, but no funding whatsoever.
And if I could just provide a follow-up, normally these would have a time frame attached to them, which we could deal with them in our process a little bit better than on an emergency basis.
Yeah, I agree. This did come in late, and I don't know if that's part of the innovation world, but it doesn't give us much time. Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I'm going to address 2 points. One is we provided $10,000 initially for a year-long program, and then Community Futures actually funded another round with them because they saw the benefit of that to the community. This letter actually had come in time to get on the agenda. It was an error that it didn't get included, something to do with vacation time of staff, etc. So it came forward as a late item just because of that, not that it wasn't here in time. We all know that it was here and it was intended to be on this agenda. So this letter that we're providing is not indicating that we are providing financial support or any other support but a letter at this point. So I'm anticipating that once this goes forward, if they're successful in their funding, they will come forward and tell us what more details on what the programs are that they're going to be providing.
Okay, any further discussion? A motion is on the floor regarding a non-binding letter of support. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's noted, and the resolution goes forward. No emergency items. We're at the end of the agenda. Item 14, a motion to adjourn. Thank you, and seconded. And all in favor? Any opposed? We're adjourned. It's 8:38. Any questions, comments from those here? We'll start with Pam, and then we'll go to Mr. Peaks. Todd. No. No, this is Innovation Ireland Technology Association. It's a nonprofit that basically began its life in Nanaimo, therefore it's called Innovation Ireland, and they do a lot of programming and training and working with entrepreneurs and startups in the innovation and technology side. It does sound a lot of people use those names.